Good morning, everyone. We're now continuing with our new series, which is How to Work with People, based on Swami's wonderful little book called The Art of Supportive Leadership. So let's start with the prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dearest friend and guide Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to attune ourselves to the divine power that is available to us if we align our hearts and minds with its flow. Help us always to know that the infinite power is there, trying to uplift and guide us and take us toward our true goal of perfect happiness. Guide us, bless us, enlighten us. Om Peace. Amen. Reflecting on my opening class last night, and it is the way Swami opened his book, so I had to I can't entirely blame myself. I had realized I was talking about, inspiring people to give up their lives for a cause, to sacrifice their comfort, their well-being, and their security for their cause. And all of this makes perfect sense to me. And this is all really like good news in my world. But I recognize that some people don't have the same karmic draw to that kind of extreme. My great fear, deep fear, before I met Swami was that I never would find a transcendent purpose, that I would just live my life from one minor occupation to another. So it wasn't hard to inspire me to give my all to a cause, because I think that's what I was born to do. But the extreme example often also demonstrates the more mundane example, because when you can take a principle all the way to its farthest position and then see it, what it really means there, you can also understand how it applies all the way back. And that's why Swami does start his book by talking about generals in battle. He's trying to show you in the most extreme leadership, in the most extreme situations, what a magnetic leader can achieve, because that illustrates the principle. So most of us are working with our family, with our friends, with our children. We may work in a company, we may supervise a few others, we may have others supervising us, we may belong to a knitting club or a theater group or someplace where helping other people to work together for a common cause, we can contribute more helpfully to life if we understand. But I do realize those are the contexts that most of us are working in, and that's why we call this working with people, just how to help others achieve the goals that your shared goals. So with that thought, we're going to go back now to the battlefield. Swami also says, a great general is also loyal to his soldiers. Only in the spirit of loyalty does he demand loyalty of them in return. I mean, this loyalty is a word that is not all that popular, especially in USA politics today. One of the notable features of one of our still prominent leaders is that he's not loyal to anyone. People just say that without the appalling implications of that, which is, how can you be a leader if the only person you're thinking about is yourself in your own position? And loyalty, especially over long years, when you're talking family and children and relationships that are more than just a matter of convenience, knowing that someone is really on your side has a power to inspire and uplift that is truly impressive. And as we go through this book, we'll see it more. Thus we see that even in critical times, when stern command is necessary for proper leadership, the essence of genius in leadership is supportive, not dictatorial. An example of a great general, although not always a great tactician, was George Washington. Rather than billet his tired and hungry soldiers in civilian homes, and rather than feed them by foraging, he chose, for himself as much for his army, discomfort, cold, and hunger. I mean, the reason he did that is because it would have been a burden on the citizens, and they would have seen the army as something that was pulling them down instead of something that was lifting them up. Swami explains that in a moment. And it was common for soldiers, because they had the power of the government behind them and the urgency of war, to just come through and take. You know, they would impose them on people's accommodations, and then they would take what they needed to feed the army. But it didn't leave the citizens eager to support the cause. The opposite, it made them feel like they were unimportant and the only thing that mattered was the soldiers. And Washington knew, and this is a perfect example of what Swami said, his vision encompassed not only the necessity for victory, but also the need to have a society after that victory. And if the army was resented by the people and they thought of them as a burden, their consciousness would not be one of support when that was necessary, because war was a means to an end. And that end, in this case, was the independence of the United States, not a goal in itself. They wouldn't have gone to war just to go to war. They went so they could have a country. So George Washington was building the country at the same time that he was winning the independence. And that's the kind of leader that over a long period of time, George Washington was loyal to their need. The need of the citizens was to be able to carry on their lives, and he needed to balance that with the need of the soldiers to be able to win the independence. But you can see what a expansive awareness that takes, and what faith and inner power it takes to be able to commit yourself to the long-range goal like that. Historians who have concentrated only on the need to win the war have criticized him as impractical, if not even indecisive, but Washington understood that the need of the hour was as much to win the whole people to the concept of revolution as it was to win the revolution itself. If he won the people, even if he lost the war, they could regroup and do it again. But if he lost the people, then even if he won the war, he wouldn't have a country. Because, loyalty to the United States was not automatic. Many people thought it was folly to break away from Britain. So it was a real hearts and minds war also. It was Washington's breadth of vision and his concern for human values, as well as his greatness as a man of honor, that made him one of the great generals of history. Nowadays, it's popular to see whatever flaws a person has and then to act as if those flaws neutralize all their great qualities. But that is a foolish mistake for countless reasons, not the least of which is there is not one among us, no matter what virtues we may have, who is not also riddled with flaws. And if we don't allow the paradox to exist if we can't accept that paradox, and if we can't emphasize our strengths as we gradually overcome our weaknesses, then we will all die of despair. And a leader, above all, has to understand the human values, who people are, how they grow, what gives them strength, what takes away that strength. It is true if it is true even in the military, that leadership means leading others and involving them, not driving and coercing them, then how much more is it true in matters where total self-sacrifice is not the issue? So here, it's a life and death matter, and still the good general inspires. and leads from the front. And so how much more is it necessary that there be a holistic acceptance and support of people when you don't have life or death causes to cause them to be able to put aside their normal concerns. So you have to, well, you have to be realistic and practical. This book is written primarily for those who understand that more can be accomplished by working with people than over them. I mean, that's the whole point there. So we're calling this working with people. It doesn't just mean working with people. It means working with people, which is side by side with a shared sense of value and a shared sense of humanity and a shared sense of we all actually really want the same things here. And people think to bully. And bullying can work if you have enough power over people, but it doesn't really build anything that you'll be proud of as the years go by. And what we really have is our consciousness. Leadership is an art, and I love that. I mean, he says that in many places. He calls this the art of supportive leadership. In one context, Swami made the comment that for a leader, the medium of his artistic self-expression is other people's energy, which is a really interesting way to think about it. Because if you're trying to create something that involves many people in order to succeed, you have to inspire and guide them to put their best energy, into the enterprise. And without their energy, the enterprise simply can't succeed. I've seen some of the old films from back when NASA, the Space Association in America, was first getting going, and you see these rooms full of it's almost all men, although women played significant parts. But in these scenes, it's almost all men. These are films. These are not movies. Films meaning these are documentary, not fiction. And the men are these engineering types, mostly they wear glasses and white shirts and little ties and so on. But there's so many of them. And they're all concentrated on, let's say, the moon landing. They're all concentrated on just a couple of men up in these huge rockets who've gone to outer space, who put their spaceship down on the moon. They're walking on the moon. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who all had to work together to make that thing happen. I mean, the truck drivers who just move the equipment from place to place, what to speak of the scientists who designed it, and the technicians who were able to build it. All of that coming together. And, without great leadership and without the art of leadership, who's right, who should be guiding, whose decisions, whose calculations are the best one, who has the knack, who has the imagination. I mean, and leadership is great fun, but it's fun from a different angle than many people think. Many people think that leadership is fun because I get to be so important. I get to be the one that the spotlight is on. I'm the one that everybody, congratulates. But the real leader is an artist who with the paintbrush of everyone else's commitment makes it happen. And it's not only the gratification of watching other people also rise and shine, but it's the deep inner satisfaction of being able to serve. Swami says people think that the leadership is, the leader is free to do what he wants. He said the leader is the slave more than anyone. He's the slave of everyone else, because without their cooperation, support, and loyalty, nothing can happen. So Swami's trying to get us to really see this from a different point of view. And art, is very sensitive. Art is not, this is the dogma and this is the way I follow it. Art is having the intuition in the moment to know how something is supposed to go. And so it's all a talent well worth cultivating. No matter what your position in life, we can always be more useful if we have a greater understanding of more subtle ways that energy can flow. Bad leadership is usually due more to clumsiness than to ill will. That's a very kind and also a true way to put it. People are trying to do a good job, but they're clumsy at it. They just don't know how. They mean well. They want it to come out right. Leaving aside the natural bullies who exist, most of whom, except in circumstances where bullying has been imposed as the norm, have neither the intelligence nor the perceptivity to earn positions of real authority. And so he's saying, yes, there are those. People who fail as leaders usually do so simply because they are ill at ease in positions of leadership. They just don't know how to operate in that space. Swami has such a kind way of saying things. They are clumsy, they are ill at ease. And he's describing what could be very exasperating for individuals who are caught under the influence of such people. But ill at ease and clumsy are words that can just describe a situation accurately and point you in the direction of how you have to solve it, but there's nothing gratuitously unkind about it. And of course, this is one thing that Swami was superbly good at, is that he could always see and emphasize the positive. So under his leadership, you felt hope. You felt hope that even though I may not yet be able to accomplish this, Swami was loyal to the best that was in us. And I certainly feel, just speaking personally, that it was his unwavering commitment to my eventual success that enabled me to accomplish anything. Anything that I may have done was entirely due to his faith in me. Such leaders are like the untrained singer who bellows loudly to conceal his inability to produce a pure tone, like the actor who bludgeons his audience with bombast because he hasn't learned how to win them with subtlety, and like the mechanic who, unable to find the malfunction in a motor, kicks it in the hope of starting something. Well, you get the picture. Any tailor knows you can't merely jam a thread through the eye of a needle. The strands must be brought carefully to a point, then inserted cautiously into the eye, allowing not a single one of them to escape. The same is true of any art. One could not bluster. Sometimes leaders, Swami, he talked about something which he called sort of the ego. He called it sometimes institutional ego. Sometimes he would call it home office ego. When he was growing up, his father worked for what was called Standard Oil. At that time, it was later changed to Esso. And his father was stationed in Romania for the first 13 years of Swamiji's life. And it was a mostly English and Americans in the little sort of community next to the oil plant that his father was searching for oil and then developing the oil plants. I think it was there. I think it was Romania, but it doesn't matter. And then every so often the big bosses from the New York office would come out. And some of them, of course, were good men. And Swami said some of them would just bluster. His father was an oil geologist. He'd been on the site for years. He'd been working carefully, with everything there. And the man from the home office comes, and Swami says he remembers, he just stabbed his finger on the map and said, "Dig there," And Swami's father was just beside himself. This man knew absolutely nothing about the circumstances, but he was from the home office, and therefore he was the New York executive. So he could go all the way to Romania and point to a spot on the map, and he had to be right because he was from New York. It was just so annoying, as you can well imagine. But sometimes people, because they're not comfortable in the leadership role, because they're ill at ease. They don't know how to make a pure tone like a singer, so they just bellow the song out. It's not necessarily that they're malicious. They might be natural bullies, but more likely they have this outside created idea of what a leader is supposed to be like, to be authoritative and to be knowledgeable. But it's just, art is quite different. One cannot bluster. One must attune himself sensitively to the requirement of the medium he is using. And the medium for leaders is other people's energy. So you have to attune yourself to who you're working with. What is it that they have to give? How do they want to give it? And in that way, to paint fine lines, an artist must use a thin brush, not a thick one. To depict loneliness, a composer may well limit himself to a simple melodic line. Certainly he won't use crashing chords. Bluster, unfortunately, is the response of many people in positions of leadership to even sensitive issues, issues where finesse and patience are essential if the support of one's subordinates is to be won. And this is what Swamiji, this is George Washington. This is the qualified leader, recognizes that human nature and human personality is very sensitive. Even strong people appreciate being dealt with in a conscious and careful way. But you see, you can't just rush in then. You have to be patient. If you're painting a delicate flower, on a small canvas, you have to consider every little stroke that you make. And when you're working with human energy, which is far more subtle and unpredictable in its responses, if you're holding your paintbrush and working with it carefully, how much more carefully you have to hold your words and your thoughts when you're dealing with people. Swami was so conscious in the way he communicated. I countless times with myself, and I certainly saw it with others, he would, and this will come through as we get into the specifics later, but he would introduce a topic. He would just start the conversation on the basic topic and then just see how far he could take it. On a very trivial point, when I was running the kitchen at the retreat back in 1971, and I was very hardworking and very sincere, but I was a terrible cook, which was a very serious drawback. And I also had mental concepts about healthy food that did not necessarily include that people would enjoy eating it, only that it would be good for their bodies. And basically, after a while, the populace revolted and appealed to Swami for some rescue from an almost steady diet of Jerusalem artichokes and kale, because that was what was available in the garden, and because they were organic and they were homegrown. And I don't know, in retrospect. And kale was not trendy then. Kale was really, really industrial strength health food. And it still is, but somehow it's become trendy. So that's the way it is. Jerusalem artichokes are just one of God's unusual tricks, because they're extremely healthy. And where we were, they grew extremely well. And they're not bad raw. They taste sort of like a carrot. But I have yet, even after all these years, found any successful way of cooking them that is not, even to me, terrible. But I fed them regularly, at least once, sometimes twice a day, to these poor people. And so they were at their wits' ends, basically. But somewhere in there, I had figured out that something was wrong and I needed to do it better. And I was trying to now make food that was also pleasant for the palate. But I just couldn't, even when I followed a recipe. It was Swami said to me later that I was so fixed in my mental concepts that I couldn't actually taste what I was cooking. I just couldn't tell how it tasted. Now I'm into the story, I have to finish it. But so Swamiji, he knew he had to do something. So he said something to me about the lunch that I had cooked that day, And I said, yes, sir. And I said, yes, it didn't come out the way I hoped it would come out. And he said, yes, it was a little bland. That's the word he used instead of ghastly. It was a little bland. I said, yes, I know. And I tried to do this and I tried to follow the recipe. And then he said, a lot of what you cook is a little bland. Like that. I still remember the delicate way, but see, in retrospect, what he was doing was he was testing the water. Because I was working hard, I was trying hard. If he told me that I was a complete disaster and everybody was rebelling against me, it would have just broken my heart. I don't know if I could have recovered. But he was testing, and he could see that I was now beginning to understand something that I hadn't understood when I started, which is that there were other dimensions besides pure health when you started thinking about food. And when he saw me receptive, he kept going the next step. And see, for years afterwards, I watched him talk to other people with exactly the same way, just feeling it out, testing the water, seeing how much receptivity there is, carrying the conversation as far as the person can receive. Now, of course, there's lots of other factors here, but this is a very important principle. And in that particular time, Swami, at the end of that conversation, he said to me, would you like me to teach you to cook? I said, oh, I would be so grateful. And then, so then that weekend, some of you have heard me say this before, but that weekend, Swami Nirmalananda, who was a disciple of Ananda Muyama, American man, a friend of Swami's, who now actually goes under the title of Abbot George. And Nirmalananda came to visit Swami for the weekend, and Nirmalananda was a hardy trencherman, to use a P.G. Woodhouse phrase. He was a big man. And from Friday night to Sunday night, Swami, myself, Seva, and this man named Satya, older man, older to us, Satya, and the four of us were together, and we cooked 3 meals every day. And except I thought the way Swami was going to teach me to cook is I came with a notebook and a pen. I don't know what I thought he was going to teach me. And basically all I did was cut vegetables and wash dishes for the whole weekend. But somehow or another, he transferred something into my consciousness because I was receptive. The last day, it was Sunday afternoon, we were all sitting on the floor. This is just the picture I remember. We were all sitting around on the floor talking, and it was time for supper, and Swami said, you know, what shall we have? Let's have a fruit salad. Seva said, oh, I'll cook it. I'll make it. And so she got up to go, and then Swami said, no, no, and then very elaborately, I'm teaching Asha to cook, he said like that. And so he took me up to the kitchen, and we made the fruit salad, which meant that I peeled oranges, you know, and washed dishes. I mean, I did nothing. But on Monday morning, I knew how to cook. And I cooked pretty well. I just, somehow, because I was receptive, he was able to transfer into me his own intuitive, because he was a very good cook, his own just intuitive understanding of food. And just from that point, I could just tell. I could just feel what things would go together. There are great cooks in our community, and I'm not one of them. But I'm a good cook, and I can fix food nicely, and people don't have to rebel against me anymore. But it was perfect leadership on Swamiji's part, absolutely perfect, because the medium of his leadership was me. And he had a long-range picture in his mind of what I would be able to do. And cooking actually turned out to be quite an important part of the things I've done over the last decades, serving Ananda and serving Swami specifically. But he could have just fired me, told me that I was incompetent, ordered me to get better, you know, just any number of things. But he didn't. He was an artist painting a picture, and he figured out what his medium was and what he had and how it would respond and where this color would go to another. And because of being on the receiving end, you know, I deeply, with my whole heart, appreciate what a magnificent gift this is if we can develop it in ourselves and then to give to others. God bless you, my friend.